Welcome to episode 17 of Basics and Beyond, the podcast. This week, my guest is Tevara Paranto, a licensed psychotherapist. She specializes in eating disorders, disordered eating, and she is here to talk to us about strategies and the ins and outs of understanding why we use food the way that we do and helping us to have a better relationship with food, with our bodies, and how we can live more happy days, we can live healthier days, and we can move past all of the craziness that's out there when we think about food. I am so happy to have my former therapist on with me today. Welcome to the show. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Basics and Beyond, the podcast. I have one of the most important, I'm choking up just trying to say it. One of the most important in my life is here. And unfortunately, she hasn't, or fortunately, it depends on how you look at it. She hasn't been in my life for probably, I think we figured out it's the last 13 years. But today we get to talk to Tevara Paranto. She is an amazing therapist that I was fortunate to meet at a time in my life where I desperately needed to meet her. I had been in therapy for years and years, off and on, with a variety of therapists. And I met one who was amazing in her own right back in Minnesota. And she looked at me one day and she said, "Oh, Laura, you are doing so great in therapy and you don't need me. You need someone who can talk to you about your food and your eating disorder." And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have an eating disorder." And so luckily, I was moving to Denver, and that is where I met this lovely woman who brought me into her office and really laid down the law day one with a box of Kleenex and helped me to become the person that I am and grow so immensely, even in just the 2 years we worked together. So Tevara, welcome to the show.
Oh, Laura, that was really emotional. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited you're here. So Tevara, I've given a little bit of background on me. We might get into that later, who knows? But tell us about you and tell us what you do and how you do what you do. Talk to us a little bit about you.
Yeah. Well, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, also just known as a psychotherapist. And I have a private practice in Westminster, Colorado. I've been in private practice for 20 years. My son is 19, and I started it right after he was born. So about 19, 20 years. But I've been doing therapy for 25 years. And I primarily work with women who are struggling with eating disorders and trauma, any type of mental health. And I also kind of do the whole gamut. I'll see couples and see men as well. But my specialty is eating disorders and body image and trauma. So that is what I do. I love it. I've always been really, really, really passionate about helping women and helping some of the big issues that are in society, and struggles with food and our bodies are one of the biggest ones. So that's kind of why I do what I do. And I love seeing people thrive like you. And to have a client like reach out to me after, what did we say, 13 years?
Yeah.
So if it was 2011, so 13 years, that's the best part of what I do, is to see somebody like you who now has freedom, who's free. I feel like you can have the eating disorder and be in prison and be battling that, or you can be in freedom. And you surely are the example of freedom.
Oh, thank you. Some days are freer than others, right?
Yeah, there's always going to be a battle, right? Like with the culture we live in. So we have to like manage the messages we get all the time and just where our brain wants to go. And we want to default to like maybe the old ways of being. And sometimes it takes more strength to take this road.
Oh my gosh, for sure. So
right?
you said you brought up, particularly in this day and age, managing all the things that are kind of thrown at us. So let's get a little bit specific about eating disorders, how do you define an eating disorder? I know, because like I said, when that therapist said to me that I had eating disorders, I was like, oh, you're crazy. Like she's like, and when we talked, it was the anorexic, the bulimia, and I was like, and I remember, I know I remember more than you do about our relationship at that
Oh,
time.
I'm sure you do.
Because it changed my life completely. But I remember sitting in your office and I looked at you and I remember thinking to myself, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. And I said it out loud. I said, if I was anorexic, I would look a lot better than I do right now. And because I use, humor to try to
Yes.
help things.
Yes.
So can you give us kind of what is an eating disorder? Oh, that's going to be tough. How do we know? But what is the difference
Yeah.
between an eating disorder and just having some kind of food issues?
Disordered eating.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yes.
Right. I mean, I think when it falls into an eating disorder is when it's really taking over and interfering in a lot of parts of your life, like your relationships, your day-to-day living, whatever that looks like, parenting, your job. It's interfering in just your whole physical health. When your physical health starts to break down and you're compromising that, that can be a tipping point that it's an eating disorder. And when you have that monkey mind, like there's no room for anything else. Um, and it is a fine line. I think there's a lot of disordered eating, and then the eating disorder is it's it's a mental health issue. And it's something that is genetic. One that can be. It's a biopsychosocial thing. So it's rooted in biology. So maybe somebody in your family history or your genetics maybe had an eating disorder at one time. Social, which I think we know why it's social, because we have a culture that's rooted in that pursuit of thinness.
Mm.
So there's the social component, and then psychological. So if we're stressed out or we have some form of trauma, we find a way to cope with that, which is our relationship with food and our bodies. And so when it becomes really that's all we're doing, that's when it flips into an eating disorder. And that's the really simple way. There's a lot of diagnostic criteria for anorexia nervosa, bulimia, binge eating disorder, which is a really, really common one. I think people often think of eating disorders as just being the anorexic side. And
Mm.
actually, binge eating disorder is probably the most prevalent eating disorder that we see.
It's interesting that you say that because you're right. We don't hear about that very often at all. Can you dig into that a little bit so everyone can get an idea of what that really is?
Yeah, I think it kind of pairs with that anorexic presentation. So restriction, this is what I always tell my clients, restriction will lead to binging. And so people might not think that they have an eating disorder because they're eating still, but they are not eating several meals throughout the day. And then here comes 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, and your body is famished. And so you end up binging and kind of going into autopilot because your body is doing what it needs to do. It's looking for energy.
Mhm.
And so you end up binging. And then the next day you wake up and feel a lot of shame and guilt. So you skip meals the whole day and then binge. And it doesn't always happen in the evenings, but usually I would say like most of the time we see binge eating happening in the evenings, but it's just feeling out of control with food and not being able to turn the switch off, and not being able to monitor your internal hunger and fullness cues. And it's this repetitious behavior. So binge eating is really common.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing when you talk about, the lack of control and not being able to monitor those hunger cues, because when we're in that space, and that is something that we do over and over again, our body physiologically starts to just go, okay, well, if this is how it's going to be, I'm going to turn those hunger cues down for you so that because the body
Yeah.
is a very efficient machine and it's not going to waste time cueing you if you're not going to listen. So then
Yeah.
then we get, it seems as though, right, with that disorder in particular, probably with the others too, is then you get this like catch 22 where the
Yep.
action begins to necessitate the reaction and the reaction creates the action.
You nailed it. You nailed it. Yeah. And I think the other thing that's interesting about the relationship between anorexia and binge eating is a lot of people who meet criteria for anorexia binge.
Sure.
So what I just presented, so that presentation is also could be anorexia. So it all kind of overlaps.
Mm.
So yeah, it's awful. It's a monster, and it's a monster that takes a lot of time to battle because it works for people in terms of helping them manage their stress, turn off the brain from things they don't want to think about, gives them a sense of control because everything else in their life feels out of control. And you just get stuck in that hamster wheel and it's really painful. It's
Hmm.
really painful. So it's not always, I think the big thing I always tell people, I might have told you this, is that I think a lot of people think eating disorders is just about being thin. That's like the old, the 1980s after school special, that it's just about being thin.
Right.
And
Right.
it's not, it's really, eating disorders are a way to regulate our emotions. They are a coping skill. And so it's about, we find a way, we don't want to deal with our feelings. We just want to check out. We
Hmm.
just want to totally check out, and we find this way of what we're doing with food or exercise. That can also be disordered and in that whole realm. And it's a way to manage our emotions. So to heal the eating disorder, you have to start to feel your feelings. You have to deal with your shit.
Mm-hmm. Which is not comfortable at all.
It's hard.
It's hard. Let's go back to the one of the interesting things that I found when I was in therapy with you was when you had said to me that I was anorexic and bulimic, and I did not realize at that point that all of the exercise that I was doing was actually a bulimic trait,
Yep.
right? So I tell people this all the time, like I'm open, very open about my
I
journey
love
to
it.
where I'm at. Um, Before I started to see you, for about the decade before I started to see you, what I would do is at the end of the day, I tried to make my life a zero sum game when it came to calories. So however many calories I ate during the day, I had to make sure I burned those calories by the end of the day. So if I ate 800 calories, I need to burn 800 calories, which is interesting because now I know, number one, there's no way to really track how many calories you're burning. Nice try, crazy. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
But also, I think a lot of women in particular either are not educated or don't talk about, which means not educated about it, is that our body needs X amount of calories just to survive.
Yeah.
And when you and I started talking about that bulimic part, I was like, are you kidding? I and I was like, I work out because it de-stresses me. I work out because, it's a healthy thing to do, right? And it was a really interesting learning opportunity for me to say, you can go too far with that. It can become
Yeah.
something that you use as a control issue, right? Um,
Yeah.
do you find that a, okay, so I'm wondering, if you think overall about the people you've worked with, um, particularly women, when it comes to these body image type of issues, do you find that there is usually trauma in the background that they have to deal with, or can it come just through the way social media is, or the media,
Yep.
or that kind of
Yep. Yeah. Sometimes there's no trauma. Sometimes there's no trauma. It's just diet culture, and that pursuit of thinness. And we have to be in the gym, working out and eating clean and eating this. We're not being kind to ourselves. We have to be super rigid, and so it absolutely can just come from that. Um, so, and there's a lot that comes with trauma or just a current stressor that maybe, like, sometimes people have been doing fine and then they're going through a divorce or they lost a parent or they lost someone they love. There's like a new event in their life that's pretty stressful. And so they like went on a diet, and that diet gave them that sense of control, and they might have saw the numbers on the scale start to decrease, and low. And then that gave them something to think about rather than the fact that they maybe lost a loved one or they're whatever they're trying to avoid. So it's I think you a lot of times still see the emotional part, but I definitely think it can be just diet culture that can trigger this.
So when you're working with someone who is really focused on the scale, really focused on being thin, all of those things, what are some ways that you like, what are some of the action steps that you have them take to kind of help them move away from that?
Well, one of them is to try to not weigh themselves, is to move away from the scale.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's one thing, is to not let that be a measure of success. May and have them work on, because you could step on that scale and feel fine one day, and you step on the scale the next day, nothing's changed except that number, and all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden your whole day goes to crap.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, pointing out how that is ruling the world, your world, and do you really want to be ruled by a number every day, or do you want to have this internal sense of greatness and strength and mental health? And so one thing is to move away from numbers and find ways to just be okay and meet your body where it is at that day, and find other ways to measure what your goals are. I feel good. I don't have the chatter in my body. I feel energetic. I slept really well last night. I feel strong. I feel connected to people. I feel present. I don't feel checked out. When people are consumed with numbers, it's you're kind of checked out.
It
You
is hard
can
to,
be.
yeah, it's very hard to be present because the number in your head from 5 a.m. this morning and it's noon or 2, and you're trying to be in a meeting or trying to engage with someone, and that number is sitting there, and all you're thinking about is, how do I feel sitting here in my pants? I can feel my roll. I can feel this. I can feel that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
How
yeah.
do
So I
you
think that's one thing.
do you feel so? I would imagine that a lot of people coming, a lot of women coming to you are who are focused on that number on the scale. You must get some pushback when you say, don't, no more weighing, no more looking,
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
yeah.
How does that work with,
It's fine. It's
yeah.
fine. So just meet them where they're at. And so if they're like, I have to still know that number, okay. So if you're weighing yourself like 5 times a day, because that can be a behavior, it's getting on and off the scale all day long.
Mhm.
Can we go to just weighing once a day? If they're weighing just every day, can we go to weighing every other day? So meeting them where they're at and
Mhm.
slowly allowing them to tolerate the distress of not maybe seeing that number. And then if somebody really says, I can't do that, then I meet them where they're at. And
Mhm.
and we just talk about it. It's okay. I really, I mean, everybody is different, and some people need to know that, and that's okay. That doesn't mean they can't do recovery. It really doesn't. um, but I always am trying to say that you're more than a number. You're a human being, and the number is just, it's really the least interesting thing about you, is what I always tell people. I even say that about bodies. I'll even say your body is really the least interesting thing about you.
I love
There's
that.
all this other thing about these things about you. So really getting people to embrace that, like the other internal qualities of who they are. But
Right.
it's a process, and I think everybody is different.
So when they're going through that process of reconnecting with who they really are, as opposed to focusing on all of these external things, um, what are the strategies that you employ with them?
Their values, what's important to them, like their identity and their values. So, like, if their values are connection with their family, their friends, um, all the people in their life, their community, is your relationship with food and your body interfering with that? So if you are, so for instance, if you are in the eating disorder mindset, well, I got to work out, I got to get my 3 hours of workout in, I can only eat this way, so I can't go out to that restaurant with my friends tonight because there's nothing on the menu that I can have. I've got to eat this one thing, so I can meet these goals. That gets in the way of connection. And
Mhm.
so I really help people see how their eating disorder or their relationship with food and their body gets in the way of their values. So I really work on, what are your values?
Mm.
And then we chart it out. We look at, okay, here's what's really important to you. And look at how when you're over here, it keeps you away from those things.
Is it something that for some people is very helpful to write things down? Do you have them journal so that they
Yeah.
can be reflective back on that?
Yeah, yeah, journaling and then bringing it into session and we talk about it. Um, Doing just a basic, I mean, super simple pros and cons. What
Mm,
are the pros of being in the eating disorder and what are the cons? And the biggest con is, and this is going to sound really extreme, but death,
mm,
right? Like when you're on that path, it will eventually take your life.
mhm,
Eating disorders, they used to be the number one um, mental disorder that leads to death. Now it's number two. I think opiate abuse or use is trumping that, but it's still number two.
mhm,
It leads to death.
mhm,
You can die from continuing to stay on that hamster wheel. And so, like, do you want to have a life and do you want to be free and live your life? Do you want to have a life or do you want to have the perfect body?
mhm.
I want to have a life. I
Yeah.
want to have a life. I want to
Yeah.
be free and I want to have a life. You know, I want to feel good in my body, so I want to support people and feeling good in their body, but that doesn't need to be that's not my number one value. And
Right.
so and I think there are clients who say, "Tevra, that's my value." And so I just meet them where they're at. Just meet them where they're at until we can kind of strip that down
Right.
because that's just some resistance.
It's interesting that you say that you want them to feel good in their body because that is the ultimate, right? Is to just like your body is just your vehicle. This is
Yeah.
just how we move around on the planet, right? It just gets you going where you're
Yeah.
supposed to go. And when we don't feed it or we don't fuel it properly, then it's not going to let us do the things that we value, do the things
Exactly.
we are, right? Um, do you when you spoke about being strong, you spoke about numbers on the scale, you spoke about thinness. Do you find that people, or how do you find people define their body goals? Is it the thinness piece? Do they have to, because when we work, and I know I've talked to you about this, like I talk to people about being strong, right? And
Yep.
fueling your body for the things that you want to do.
I love
Um,
that.
and the number on the scale, like, and I tell people this a lot, when you look at, and I loved it one year for the CrossFit games. I think it was only 1 year. They actually, when they listed the athlete who was performing, they put their height and their weight. And I thought that's fantastic. Like that's fantastic for the type of work that I do with people
Yeah.
and probably for the type
Yeah.
of
Oh, I
people,
see. Okay. I had to think
right?
about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's
Got it.
fantastic in that these women are really strong. And when most women see that, they say, that's what I mean, I want to, I want to be lean. I would,
Yeah.
because it's different words,
Yep.
right? I want to be lean. I mean, look at what they can do. That's amazing. That's fantastic. And they don't, I think they disconnect from what the weight of that person is versus
Hmm.
what they can do.
Totally.
And to see some like little woman who's like 5'4"
Yeah.
lifting all these weights and doing these things,
Yes.
and you look at her body and go, man, she's really fit. And she
Yeah.
weighs 170 pounds. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so do you think that there's a disconnect
Yes.
for a lot of people between what they really want when they talk about being thin and what that really means?
Totally. I love everything you just said.
Do
Yeah.
you
There's a
so
disconnect.
so other than like journaling and trying to talk to them about where their values are and things like that, are there other ways that you help them to reconnect when it comes to thinness versus strong versus ability to do things and that kind of a thing? Do you have other strategies for them to use to get there, to help them?
I mean, one big thing is just helping them see just our culture that we live in and what we're constantly the messages that we're getting constantly, you know, every day when we're scrolling on social media, or even when we go to the grocery store and we're standing in line in the aisle, we see all the magazines there and we see supermodels. And uh, TV, what's represented in TV and in the movies that we like to watch. I just am constantly showing women and men, that we are only seeing one one body type. We are often only shown thinness. We're not often shown strong or health at every size. You can be like you just said, the weight doesn't matter. You can be healthy at any size. And so it's really about, but we don't, that's not represented in our culture. We're shown that it has to look this way.
Mhm.
And so I do a lot of stripping down the messages that maybe they grew up with, the messages they got in their family. Maybe mom was only, only no sugar in the house and was, very, very limited on certain foods. And maybe mom was very insecure in her body. And so you grew up seeing that. And so looking at what messages are in your head, have them write them down. And
Mm.
then let's challenge every single thing that you wrote in your journal. Let's challenge and let's make it a message that you want to believe, not something that you were conditioned to believe.
Mhm.
What do you want to believe about that?
Mhm.
So, and everybody is different. But
I
yeah, like everyone has their own stuff in their head, and that's
Yeah.
what's playing, and that's where we live according to these rules. So we need to rewrite the rules.
Right. And it's interesting that you bring up that reconnection with what are you thinking? Let's write it down. Let's challenge that. Because I get a lot of that. I have women coming to me who are eating 800 calories or 1200 calories a day and they're go, 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 go. But here's the interest. I know I do that. I make that face. But the interesting thing is, like, I did that. I did that in my 20s. I did that in my 30s. And I'll tell you, if I did that right now at the age of 53, I wouldn't get thinner. I'd get fatter.
Yeah.
I would gain
Yes.
a ton of weight. And
Yes.
to go, hey, no, we have to shift that. And when I
Yeah.
start to feed them up, which is obviously a challenge, but when I
Yes.
start to feed them up and they start to lose that fat, that
Yeah.
inflammation, that
Yes.
unhealthy
Yes.
piece, they're like, oh my God, you're a witch
Yeah.
doctor. And I'm like, no, no, no. Because, and like what you talked about is so profound. End result, like the most extreme end result of any eating disorder is death. However, the road there is a slow death, right?
Yeah.
Because our body needs us to fuel it. And if we're not doing that, it dysregulates everything, our thyroid,
Yes.
our
Yes.
adrenals. And then our body responds completely differently because we're actually slowly killing it. And then we have
Yep.
diabetes and we have high cholesterol and we all those
Yes.
things. So even if we don't tip into that. And I think it's an interesting thing when we talk about eating disorders. Everyone thinks about the ultra skinny, all of that. And they don't think about how did you get to that point? It's everything
Yes.
you're doing right now. And sometimes it doesn't manifest as that because you're overeating on the weekends or you do, but,
Right.
but, and the mindset is if I'm skinny, I'm healthy.
Yes.
But those two
Yes.
things don't equate. That's not a
Yes.
causal. That
Yes.
just sometimes happens for some
Yes.
people, right?
Yes.
So to shift that
Yes.
mindset into being healthy versus,
Yes.
right? And
Yep.
skinny, it's funny you bring up, like, if I see, this is probably bad, but this is just my mentality. If I'm watching television and I see one of those actresses that's like stick thin, I
Yeah.
go, oh my God, she needs to lift some weights because that is not like nobody wants, but it's interesting because I talk to lots of people, you talk to lots of people. I guarantee you
Yeah.
they don't necessarily want to look like that. They want to look a certain way. And
Yeah.
most of the time that certain way means you have to eat your food.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. And so part of this is I tell people it's not your fault that you think this way.
Oh
It's
no,
not your fault.
not at
This
all.
isn't your fault. One, you learned this from culture. This was messages you got since you could start watching TV,
Mm-hmm.
and you could see all the diet ads and what your mom was doing. So it's not your fault. And number two, it's not your fault if this became a coping skill to deal with some really painful trauma in your life. It helped you. It
Mm-hmm.
helped you get through that. It makes sense that you stopped eating or that you started going into the pantry and eating secretly because it took away the pain that you were going through. So I always try to have a lot of help people have self-compassion for the relationship that they have with their body and their food. Like, we don't need to shame the heck out of you because you're here. We need to say, that makes sense. That makes sense that you've been doing that. That makes sense that you were going to the gym 4 hours a day. That makes sense. That
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot of sense. And so it's also just self-compassion is a huge way to shift out of this.
Yeah, there just isn't enough self-love out there.
Yeah.
There just isn't, not at
Yeah.
all. It's interesting, the comfort associated with food, right? And that coping mechanism. And it's not, and it's an interesting thing. A lot of people just think that's a mental thing. And what I do is I show them how physiologically, carbs are comforting. And this is why.
Yeah.
These are your serotonin,
Yeah.
your cortisol goes down, all these things. So
Yeah.
when you have had a trauma or when you've had some sort of incident happen in your life, it makes sense that your body's saying, hey, I'm
I
really
like that.
stressed out. Give me some food. Right.
Makes sense. It
Yeah.
makes sense. And you might have started when you were 10 years old.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it makes sense. It's okay. It's not, I really, people feel a lot of shame when they get to where they are or when they come to see you or they come to see me. And it's like, no, it totally makes sense why you're here. We
Mm-hmm.
don't, it's, and so I just, a lot of that,
Mm-hmm.
which also on a bigger level, they're not getting that in their life either.
No. Um, and partly probably because, and I'm going to say this from my perspective, is I surrounded myself with people who helped me stay in that space. And that wasn't about them. That was about me because I felt comfortable being uncomfortable like that. And it made sense to me. So I surrounded myself with people who triggered those kinds of things. And they weren't going to help me get out of it because
Yep.
that wasn't their job anyway. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you get it. I love it. I love
Well,
that you get it.
I have had an amazing mentor in you. Let's go back to men. I really wanted to broach that topic because
Yeah.
I talk about this a lot when I talk to other coaches because
Mm-hmm.
we tend to focus on women. And
Mm-hmm.
isn't that interesting though? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
part of the culture too, is because
Mm-hmm.
we have always grown up with women wanting to be skinny and all the models on the magazine covers, like you talked about, and women, women, women and their body image. And part of that, in my opinion, has been propagated by men because they're very visual and women
Right.
know that.
Right.
And right.
Right.
So even in our space, we talk a lot about women in
Yeah.
terms of eating disorders. However, what I've noticed and I've seen and I've heard is men are really starting to come to the forefront on that.
Oh, totally. I've treated a lot of men. I've treated a lot of men. And it's the same disorder. And when you look at that emotional component, it's even higher for men because, men, when you're a boy, boys don't cry. Men have to be strong and tough and not talk about their feelings, or there are all these terrible names, right? Like they're weak. And
Mhm.
so men, when they go to the gym or they try to control their food, that's another great way to manage their emotions, right? So that emotional component is still there, that trauma component can still be there, and the body image component can still be there because men still have it too. They
Mhm.
still get all of that we just talked about. So it's very prevalent for men.
And I would venture a guess that it is probably much more prevalent and even worse for men because I don't think they have the space to talk about it.
I know.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
Interesting.
they don't. They don't. And they probably have even more shame to seek out, even going to therapy. I think it's getting better. It's getting better. And I love when I get an email from a guy that wants to come in and work on it. But I think there's a lot of shame to even take that step. Say, help me with my relationship with food. And I'm spending too much time in the gym, or I'm too obsessed with, the supplement, some of the supplements, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on.
Sure. Oh yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. You
Yeah, the
probably know more than I
supplementation,
do.
the PEDs, all of that. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't even know how to talk about it, but
Yeah.
it's scary. It's
Yeah,
scary.
for sure.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when we first started talking, you were talking about, there's this fine line between having a disorder and not. And
Hmm.
it sounds like the one of the things that you've said multiple times is it really is understanding why you're doing what you're doing.
Hmm.
And if there is a lack of control, if it feels out of control,
That's it.
is that kind of the
That's it.
defining? Okay.
Yeah. If it's just running your life and that's all you're thinking about, if it's running your day, like
Mhm.
every move you make through the day is centered around food and your workouts or your weight,
Mhm.
then we're in the eating disorder realm. If you have a balance,
Mhm.
um, we want balance, right? We want balance. We don't want to be living over here. We want a life. Remember what I said? We want to have a life. We want to have a life. A lot of times people say, well, I just want to be thin. Do you want to be thin or do you want a life? Do you want to have a life?
I
We
think
want to
you
figure out how
actually
to have the
said that to
life.
me. I remember you saying that to me.
We want you to have a life. We don't want you to spend your whole day in the gym. Boring. An
Hmm.
hour or 2 hours, whatever that is. We don't even, let's not even go there. Let's not even go with numbers. But we don't want you to have a life.
Hmm.
We want to have a life. So that's what I'm always using that. Like it's not a life when you're just consumed with this stuff.
Right. So there is that where you can still do those things that are quote healthy, right? You can still go.
Yes.
You can, I mean, if you want to run marathon
Yes.
and it's good for you, go do it. And you like it,
Yes.
not consuming. Yep. And
Yes.
it's interesting because I work with some people who want to do macros and they want to weigh and measure their food, and some people who
Yep.
don't, and some people, and I tell people all the time, this is just what I do. I weigh my food when I'm at home. I weigh my food. If
Yep.
I'm traveling and I can bring my
Yep.
food, I do that. And I
Yep.
tell them, I said, that gives me freedom. And
Yeah.
say, how can that give you freedom? And I said, because that lets me know that I'm eating enough. Because if I'm
Yeah.
stressed, if something bad happens, or if I'm not paying attention, my natural reaction is to go and I don't eat enough. I don't
Okay.
I
Okay.
won't overeat. That's kind of
Yeah.
like my
I
base.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
you're that side of it. Yep.
Yep. My
I
baseline
love
is
it.
not to eat enough. And it's probably
Yeah.
because that was most of my life. Right.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
for me to have freedom and not to have to be consumed with food is to say, I'm eating these things. I know what I'm eating. I can still go out and eat whatever I want. I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me feel bad. I don't look back on it and feel guilty. But when I do have the control over the food, when I'm working from home and doing all those
Mhm.
things, these are the things I eat. And I eat when I want to and when I'm hungry, and I don't force
Love
it. And
it.
right. But I weigh and measure everything. And that's because if
Yep.
I don't, I'm going to undereat and I'm going to
Yep.
get myself in a
Yep.
spot. So you
Yep.
have to know yourself, right?
No, and what you said, Laura, is awesome because I think that's very common for a lot of people that have recovered from anorexia. We talk in my land the meal plan. So
Mhm.
it's like they just got to remember to stick to that meal plan because if they drop things from their meal plan, it's a slippery slope. They skip a
Mhm.
snack or they throw this out or the fat out or this or that. They're back in that restriction. So totally what you said really I really is sounds familiar to like that recovery mindset. And
Mhm.
so, but like you said, other clients, that whole measuring thing is too hard. That feels too restrictive to them. They need to like go this other way. So it's meeting people where they're at.
Absolutely. For sure.
Totally.
Yeah. Um, so I think we need to go back. One last thing I want to talk about is that connection to people. People can reconnecting with themselves.
With
Um,
themselves.
yep. And um how that plays a role in moving away from the actions of an eating disorder or
Yeah.
disordered eating, right?
Yeah.
So that whole, because it's not just what I'm hearing you say is it's not just the actions that we take. We can't just fix the actions,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not just saying
No.
go eat a hamburger,
No.
right? we have to reconnect with ourselves in order to
Yes.
make those changes
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the work, I always look at it, tell me if you feel this way. It's a symptom of a bigger problem.
Yes.
And the bigger problem is we don't pay attention to ourselves anymore.
Hmm.
And we've been taught to not pay attention to ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
Do you feel like that is something that has become more difficult to help people do, is reconnect? Or is it just the same? It's just that more people are coming in or more people are being, how do I say this? More people are understanding that they're not reconnecting with themselves.
I don't even know if people know that.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I think sometimes they need kind of a wake up call, kind of maybe like you did. I think people just have no idea. They're just doing what they think they need to be doing because they are objectifying themselves. So reconnecting is being embodied, where I'm in my body and I'm caring for my body versus objectifying my body, seeing my body as an object to be controlled. So when we objectify ourselves, we're like getting the whip out. We're like, telling it what to do. Versus when we're embodied, we are listening to our body. My body feels sore today. I might not be able to do the workout that I normally do because my body feels sore. So I'm going to do something different. I'm being kind to my body. So body kindness, being embodied. And then the other thing is when you objectify yourself, you just see yourself as a body. When you're embodied, you see yourself as being whole and all these other parts of who you are. I'm a mother, I'm a therapist, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, um, I'm a social worker, there's all these other parts. I'm a yoga teacher, I can say that.
Yeah.
I'm a yogi. Um, and all these other parts. I'm not just a body. And so I sometimes I didn't come up with this. This came from a book. I don't remember who said it, but it's like when you die and people are at your funeral, do you want the only thing that they can remember you by was, well, she had a great body?
Mm.
Or do you want to be remembered for she was kind, she was fun, she was so smart and loving. She was a great mom.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be remembered for those things, not just for what my body looked like. And so that can't be the most important thing.
Right. And it's so important, I think, particularly as I've aged, I have realized, and you don't realize this in your 20s and 30s, right? Is this thing that we walk around in will age. And
Yeah,
and you can fight it all you want, but if your whole worth is wrapped up in how this looks, like wrinkles and
yeah,
muscles and saggy and whatever
yeah,
it is, like there will be a day where you will
yeah,
look in the mirror and go, this isn't me. If that's all you're
yeah,
focused on, you won't know who
yeah,
you are because it's inevitable. It's
yeah,
an inevitability. So the work that you do is so, so powerful. I can't even, there's no way for me to quantify how my life took an exact right turn at the exact right time to meet you and have you um change who I not change who I am on the inside, but actually let me be who I am on the inside.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
amazing. And the work that you do is so powerful. And I'm so glad that we got to reconnect. If there was one thing that you want people, anyone who is possibly struggling with body image, possibly struggling with an eating disorder, if there's one thing that you want people to know or that you want them to take away from our conversation, what would that be?
Feel your feelings and know that you are more than your body. Feel your feelings and know that you are more than your body and find balance. You can really love your body and want to have a great relationship with it, but have balance in the way that you do that.
That's wonderful. Tevra, thank you so much for being with me today.
This was great.
You are fantastic. And hopefully, maybe we can do this again.
This was so fun.
Because I feel like there's so many. I started to get overwhelmed and like, we could go here, we start with this. There's so many things to talk about.
We did it.
We did it. So we'll definitely do this again. And I will make sure to give you credit in the show notes for who you are, what you do, and where people can get a hold of you. I know that you're super busy because you have a lot of people. Nowadays, everyone needs so much help. Not that we didn't before, but people are reaching out now, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you. I love you. You are my heart. You saved me.
Oh, I love you too. Thank you for letting me be here with you. And I'm just really proud of you. You need to know that. Like sometimes people probably don't tell you that, but I'm proud of you because it takes a lot of strength to do this path than the other path.
Thank you. I appreciate you.